The initial thought, a simple concept, emerged from the mind of a French scholar named Edouard de Laboulaye. He was a person who held a deep respect for the United States of America. His admiration was not just for the country itself, but for the fundamental principles it represented. He believed in the ideals of freedom and liberty, concepts that were, to him, very important. It was his wish to create something, a physical representation, that would honor the bond between France and the United States. This bond was based on their shared belief in these important principles. He envisioned a monument, a large structure, that would stand as a symbol of this friendship and these shared values. This was the very beginning, the seed of an idea that would eventually grow into something much larger and more widely recognized. Laboulaye shared this nascent idea with a sculptor, a man named Frederic Auguste Bartholdi. Bartholdi was an artist, someone who worked with his hands to create large, impressive figures. He was, by nature, a person who could be moved by grand concepts, and this idea, presented by Laboulaye, resonated with him. He found inspiration in the thought of creating a monument that embodied liberty. He began to think about how such a concept could be translated into a physical form. His mind started to consider shapes, sizes, and materials. He started to sketch, to draw, to imagine what this figure of liberty might look like. This was the artistic beginning, the point where the abstract idea began to take on a more concrete visual form. The sculptor's involvement was crucial, as it was his skill that would eventually bring the idea to life. The project, though still in its early stages, began to gain some momentum. To make such a grand vision a reality, a significant amount of resources would be needed. This included money, materials, and labor. To organize the effort and to gather the necessary funds, a group was formed. This group was called the Franco-American Union. Their purpose was clear: to raise the money required to build this monument. This was a large undertaking, one that would require contributions from many people. The formation of this union marked a more formal step in the project's development, moving it from a mere idea to a structured endeavor with a clear objective. It was a sign that the project was serious and that there was a collective will to see it through. The initial concept for the monument was to create a statue of a woman. This woman would be a representation of liberty. The choice of a female figure was deliberate, as women have often been used to symbolize abstract concepts like justice, wisdom, and freedom throughout history. This particular woman would embody the spirit of liberty, a concept that was deeply cherished by both nations. The statue was intended to be a powerful symbol, one that would be easily understood and recognized. It was hoped that this symbol would eventually become known around the world, a universal representation of freedom. The journey from this initial idea of a female figure to the final, iconic statue was a long and detailed process, involving many decisions about design, materials, and construction. Each step was carefully considered, ensuring that the final product would accurately convey the intended message. Throughout this early phase, the dedication of both Edouard de Laboulaye and Frederic Auguste Bartholdi was evident. Laboulaye, with his initial vision and his unwavering belief in the project, provided the intellectual foundation. Bartholdi, with his artistic talent and his commitment to bringing the vision to life, provided the creative drive. Their combined efforts were essential. They faced many challenges, as any large project does. There were doubts, there were financial hurdles, and there were logistical complexities. However, their persistent efforts and their shared commitment to the ideal of liberty ensured that the project would not falter. They continued to work, to plan, and to advocate for the statue, even when the path forward was not always clear. Their dedication was a key factor in the eventual realization of the monument. Without their initial spark and their continued perseverance, the Statue of Liberty might have remained just an idea, a thought that never took physical form. Their work laid the groundwork for what would become a globally recognized symbol, a beacon of hope and freedom for many generations to come. The process was slow, deliberate, and required a great deal of patience. Each small step forward, each problem solved, brought the project closer to its ultimate goal. The early days were filled with discussions, drawings, and the gradual building of support. It was a time of laying foundations, not just for the physical structure, but for the entire endeavor. The concept of liberty, so central to the project, was something that resonated deeply with many people, providing a strong motivation for their involvement. The idea of a gift from one nation to another, celebrating shared values, was also a powerful motivator. This initial phase, though perhaps less dramatic than the later construction, was vital. It was the period when the dream was conceived and nurtured, slowly but surely taking root in the minds of those who would make it a reality. The discussions were often long and the details were many, but the core idea remained constant: a monument to liberty and friendship. This steadfastness in purpose was a defining characteristic of the project from its very beginning. The early planning involved many conversations, often over long periods, as the full scope of the undertaking became clear. The commitment to the project was not just a fleeting interest but a deep-seated belief in its importance. This foundational period set the tone for the entire construction, emphasizing careful thought and persistent effort. The initial idea, once spoken, began to take on a life of its own, drawing in others who shared the same vision. The process was organic, growing from a simple suggestion into a complex, multifaceted undertaking. The early steps were deliberate, each one building upon the last, creating a solid base for the grand structure that was yet to come. The vision was clear, even if the path to its realization was long and winding. The initial enthusiasm, combined with careful planning, ensured that the project would continue to move forward, one step at a time, towards its eventual completion. The concept of a monument to liberty was not new, but the scale and ambition of this particular project set it apart. It was a testament to the power of an idea and the dedication of those who believed in it. The early discussions were filled with hope and determination, as the future shape of the statue began to emerge from the realm of imagination into the world of possibility. The very first thoughts, the quiet conversations, were the true genesis of this enduring symbol. They were the moments when the abstract became concrete, when a dream began its slow journey towards reality. The initial spark, though small, contained within it the potential for something truly monumental. And so, the journey began, with a simple idea, a dedicated scholar, and a talented sculptor, all working towards a common goal: the creation of a lasting symbol of freedom and friendship. The design process for the Statue of Liberty was a careful and extended affair. Frederick Auguste Bartholdi, the sculptor entrusted with this significant task, did not arrive at the final design overnight. His process began with a multitude of sketches, simple lines on paper that explored the fundamental form of the statue. He drew a woman, a figure that would represent the abstract concept of liberty. He experimented with her posture, the position of her arms, and the expression on her face. These early drawings were numerous and varied, each one a small step in the long journey of design. They were the initial explorations, the first attempts to give a visual form to a powerful idea. This phase was one of trial and error, of considering different possibilities and gradually refining the concept. The sketches were not just about the overall shape, but also about the feeling the statue would evoke. It needed to be strong, yet welcoming, majestic, yet approachable. These were the qualities Bartholdi sought to capture in his initial drawings. Following the sketching phase, Bartholdi moved on to creating small models out of clay. This was a crucial step, as it allowed him to see the statue in 3 dimensions for the first time. The clay models were small enough to be held in his hands, to be turned and examined from every possible angle. He could see how the light would fall on the statue, how the shadows would play across its surface. This was something that could not be fully appreciated from a 2-dimensional sketch. The clay models allowed for a more tactile and intuitive understanding of the form. He could add a little clay here, remove a little there, constantly refining the shape. This was a slow and deliberate process, one that required a great deal of patience and a keen eye for detail. The models were not just for his own benefit, they were also used to show others the progress of the design, to get feedback, and to build support for the project. As the design became more refined, the models grew in size. From small clay figures, Bartholdi progressed to larger plaster models. These were more detailed and more substantial than the clay models. They were created in sections, each one a carefully crafted piece of the whole. The plaster models were a significant step closer to the final statue. They allowed for a more accurate representation of the final form, and they were used to create the molds for the copper plates. The creation of these large plaster models was a major undertaking in itself, requiring a large workshop and a team of skilled assistants. Each section had to be perfect, as any imperfections would be transferred to the final statue. This was a time of intense work and concentration, as the design was finalized and prepared for the next stage of construction. The choice of material for the statue was a critical decision. It needed to be a material that was strong enough to withstand the elements, yet light enough to be transported and assembled. It also needed to be a material that would age gracefully, that would develop a character of its own over time. After much consideration, copper was chosen. Copper was a good choice for several reasons. It was relatively lightweight, which would make the construction and transportation easier. It was also strong and durable, able to withstand the harsh weather of New York Harbor. And, perhaps most importantly, it would develop a natural patina over time, a greenish coating that would protect the metal from further corrosion. This patina would also give the statue its distinctive color, a color that has become synonymous with the Statue of Liberty. The decision to use copper was a practical one, but it also had an aesthetic dimension, as the changing color of the statue would become a part of its story. The immense size of the statue was another key consideration. It was intended to be a grand and imposing figure, one that would be visible from a great distance. This was important for its symbolic purpose. It needed to be a beacon, a landmark, a powerful statement. The size of the statue presented many challenges, both in terms of design and construction. Everything had to be scaled up, from the initial sketches to the final assembly. The engineering challenges were particularly daunting. The statue needed a strong internal structure to support the weight of the copper skin and to withstand the force of the wind. This was a task that required the expertise of a skilled engineer. To address this challenge, Gustave Eiffel was brought into the project. Eiffel was a renowned engineer, known for his innovative work with iron structures. He was tasked with designing the internal framework of the statue. His design was ingenious. He created a flexible iron skeleton that would support the copper skin, but also allow it to move slightly. This was a crucial innovation, as it allowed the statue to expand and contract with changes in temperature, and to sway gently in the wind without being damaged. The collaboration between Bartholdi, the artist, and Eiffel, the engineer, was a perfect example of the fusion of art and science. It was this combination of artistic vision and engineering prowess that made the construction of the Statue of Liberty possible. The design and modeling phase was a long and arduous journey, but it was a necessary one. It was a process of turning an abstract idea into a concrete plan, a blueprint for a monument that would become a global symbol of hope and freedom. Every detail was carefully considered. Every challenge was met with ingenuity and determination. The result was a design that was both beautiful and enduring, a testament to the skill and dedication of its creators. The journey from a simple sketch to a detailed plan was a story of its own, a story of creativity, innovation, and perseverance. It was the foundation upon which the Statue of Liberty was built, and it was a story that was just as important as the construction itself. The careful planning and meticulous design ensured that the statue would not only be a beautiful work of art, but also a lasting monument that would stand for generations to come. The process was slow, but it was also thorough, ensuring that every aspect of the design was just right. The final design was a culmination of years of work, a testament to the power of a shared vision and the dedication of those who worked to bring it to life. The design was not just a plan for a statue. It was a plan for a symbol that would come to represent the highest ideals of humanity. And so, with the design complete, the next phase of the project could begin, the long and arduous process of construction. The blueprint was ready, and the dream was one step closer to becoming a reality. The design phase was over, but the story of the Statue of Liberty was far from finished. It was just beginning. Raising funds for the Statue of Liberty was a significant and often difficult undertaking. The creation of such a large and meaningful monument required a substantial amount of money, and securing these funds was a process that unfolded in two distinct parts. one in France and one in the United States. Each nation faced its own set of challenges in gathering the necessary financial support, but both ultimately succeeded through persistent effort and the contributions of many individuals. In France, the responsibility for collecting money for the statue itself fell to an organization known as the Franco-American Union. This group was dedicated to the project and worked diligently to raise the required funds. They employed a variety of methods to encourage donations. One common approach was to organize events, such as lotteries, where people could purchase tickets with the hope of winning a prize, knowing that their money would go towards the statue. Another method involved the sale of souvenirs, small items related to the statue or the friendship between the two nations, which people could buy as a way of contributing and having a tangible reminder of their support. Beyond these organized events, the Union actively sought direct donations from individuals and organizations who believed in the project. This process was not quick. It was slow and required a great deal of patience and persistent effort from the committee members. Despite the challenges and the gradual pace of fundraising, the committee remained steadfast in their commitment to their goal, continuing to work towards accumulating the necessary funds to complete the statue. Across the Atlantic, in the United States, a separate committee was formed with the specific task of raising money for the statue/S pedestal. This part of the fundraising effort proved to be even more challenging than the one in France. Many Americans, perhaps understandably, questioned why they should be responsible for funding the base for a gift that was being given to them by another country. There was a perception that since the statue was a gift, its entire cost, including the foundation it would stand upon, should be covered by the givers. This sentiment made the initial fundraising campaign in the U.S. quite difficult, and progress was slow. The committee struggled to generate widespread enthusiasm and financial contributions from the general public. However, a turning point arrived with the involvement of newspapers, particularly one owned by Joseph Pulitzer, known as the New York World. Pulitzer was a prominent figure in journalism, and he recognized the potential of the statue to inspire the American people. He decided to use his newspaper as a platform to galvanize public support and raise the much-needed funds for the pedestal. He began to publish compelling articles, written in a style that appealed directly to the public /S sense of patriotism and national pride. These articles emphasized the importance of the statue as a symbol of liberty and the shared values between France and the United States. Pulitzer made a bold promise. He would print the name of every single donor in his newspaper, regardless of how small their contribution might be. This innovative approach proved to be incredibly effective. It tapped into a desire among ordinary citizens to be a part of something significant, to see their names recognized for their contribution to a national monument. Small donations, often just a few cents or $1, began to pour in from people from all walks of life. Children, factory workers, and small business owners all contributed what they could. These small, individual contributions, when combined, eventually accumulated into the substantial sum required to fund the construction of the pedestal. This widespread participation demonstrated the power of collective effort and the ability of a compelling message to unite people for a common cause. Beyond the newspaper campaign, various other fundraising methods were employed in the United States to gather money for the pedestal. Social events were organized, such as elaborate dinners where wealthy patrons could contribute large sums. Art exhibitions were held, showcasing works that were sometimes auctioned off, with the proceeds going towards the statue. Theatrical performances were also staged, with ticket sales contributing to the fund. These diverse approaches helped to reach different segments of the population and to generate interest and support for the project. The entire fundraising process, both in France for the statue and in the United States for its pedestal, was characterized by its length and its arduous nature. It demanded not only financial contributions but also immense creativity in devising fundraising strategies and unwavering perseverance from those leading the efforts. There were moments of doubt and frustration, but the belief in the importance of the monument kept the campaigns moving forward. Ultimately, despite all the financial hurdles and the skepticism faced along the way, the necessary funds were successfully raised. This financial success was a critical step, ensuring that both the statue, crafted in France, and its pedestal, built in America, could be completed. The overcoming of these financial obstacles transformed the initial dream of liberty and friendship, symbolized by the statue, into a tangible and enduring reality, a physical presence that would stand for generations to come. The fundraising journey itself became a part of the statue-S story, highlighting the widespread support and the collective effort that went into its creation. It was a testament to the power of a shared vision and the willingness of people to contribute to something greater than themselves. The money, piece by piece, dollar by dollar, was gathered, allowing the grand vision to move from concept to construction. The financial foundation was laid, just as the physical foundation would soon be. This phase, though focused on money, was deeply intertwined with the ideals the statue represented, as people gave what they could to support a symbol of freedom and hope. The process was a slow accumulation, a testament to the idea that many small efforts can lead to a grand achievement. The story of the fundraising is a story of community, of shared purpose, and of the belief that some things are worth investing in, not just with money, but with time and effort. The financial challenges were significant, but the determination to see the project through was even greater. And so, the funds were secured, paving the way for the next stages of the statue-S journey to its permanent home. The construction of the Statue of Liberty began in France, specifically in a large and bustling workshop located in Paris. This was not a small undertaking. It was a massive project that required the skills of many dedicated individuals. The process involved a team of highly skilled craftsmen, each one an expert in their particular trade. Their main task was to work with large sheets of copper, transforming this raw material into the intricate and detailed forms that would make up the statue. This was done by carefully hammering the copper sheets over specially prepared wooden molds. These molds were precise replicas of the statue-S various parts, ensuring that each piece of copper would take on the exact shape required. This method of construction was known as repoussé, a technique that involves shaping metal by hammering on the reverse side to create a design in relief. It was a slow and incredibly precise process. Each individual piece of copper had to be worked with great care and attention to detail. The goal was to ensure that every single piece would fit perfectly with all the other pieces, like a giant, complex puzzle. Any slight misalignment or imperfection could cause problems later on during the assembly of the entire statue. The craftsmen worked diligently, day after day, shaping the metal with their hammers, listening to the rhythmic sounds of their work filling the large workshop. The statue was not built as a single monolithic unit. Instead, it was constructed in many separate sections. This modular approach was necessary due to the statue-S immense size, which would have made it impossible to transport in one piece. The construction began with the smaller, more manageable parts, gradually moving to the larger and more complex sections. For example, the head of the statue was one of the first major components to be completed. Then came the arm that would eventually hold the torch, a significant and highly visible part of the monument. Finally, the various sections that would form the body of the statue were meticulously crafted. Each of these sections, even individually, represented a significant undertaking, requiring many hours of labor and careful craftsmanship. Frederick Auguste Bartholdi, the sculptor who conceived the statue-S design, was not merely an artist who provided a drawing and then stepped away. He was deeply involved in the entire construction process. He closely supervised every stage of the work, from the initial hammering of the copper sheets to the final assembly of the sections. His presence in the workshop was constant, and he meticulously ensured that every detail adhered precisely to his original design. He would inspect the work, offer guidance, and make sure that the vision he had for the statue was being faithfully executed. His presence in the workshop was constant, and he meticulously ensured that every detail adhered precisely to his original design. He would inspect the work, offer guidance, and make sure that the vision he had for the statue was being faithfully executed. His dedication and passion for the project were evident in the careful workmanship displayed by the craftsmen. He was not just a supervisor. He was a driving force, inspiring those around him with his commitment to the monumental task. The construction of the statue in France continued for many years. It was a long and arduous journey, marked by countless hours of labor and unwavering commitment. This extended period of construction stands as a testament to the hard work and perseverance of everyone involved, from the individual craftsmen shaping the copper to the engineers designing the internal structure, and of course, Bartholdi himself. Slowly but surely, piece by piece, the statue began to take its magnificent shape. What had once been merely an idea, a concept in the mind of a scholar and an artist, was gradually transforming into a tangible physical form. The workshop in Paris became a hub of activity, a place where a dream was being meticulously built, piece by painstaking piece. This monumental effort in France was an absolutely crucial step in bringing the symbol of liberty to life. It was here that the raw materials were shaped, the intricate details were formed, and the various components were prepared for their long journey across the ocean. The work done in France laid the essential groundwork, ensuring that when the time came for assembly in its new home, all the pieces would be ready to form the iconic monument that would stand as a beacon of freedom for generations to come. The process was a slow dance between artistic vision and practical execution, each step dependent on the precision and skill of the previous one. The hammering, the shaping, the fitting, all contributed to the gradual emergence of a masterpiece. The air in the workshop was filled with the sounds of creation, the metallic ring of hammers on copper, the quiet discussions among the craftsmen, and the occasional instructions from Bartholdi. It was a place of intense focus and shared purpose, where the collective effort of many hands brought a grand vision closer to reality. The construction was not just about building a statue, it was about building a symbol that would come to represent the highest ideals of humanity. And every day, as the copper skin grew, that message became more and more visible. The work was a testament to human ingenuity and perseverance, a grand project undertaken with a clear purpose and a deep belief in its ultimate significance. The years passed, but the dedication remained, culminating in the creation of a monument that would transcend its physical form and become an enduring emblem of liberty and friendship across the world. The careful planning and execution in France ensured that the statue would be not only beautiful but also structurally sound, capable of standing tall for centuries. This phase was a triumph of engineering and artistry, a true collaboration that resulted in one of the world-s most recognizable landmarks. The journey of the Statue of Liberty, from its conceptualization to its physical realization, was a long and winding road, but each step, especially the construction in France, was vital to its eventual success. The Parisian workshop was more than just a place of construction. It was a crucible where an idea was forged into reality, piece by painstaking piece, until the magnificent form of Lady Liberty began to emerge, ready for her transatlantic voyage and her ultimate destiny as a symbol of hope and freedom. After its completion in Paris, the Statue of Liberty was a magnificent sight. It stood tall, a testament to the vision of its creators and the skill of its builders. However, its journey was far from over. The statue was too large to be transported across the Atlantic Ocean in one piece. Therefore, it had to be carefully disassembled into many smaller components. This was a painstaking process, as each piece had to be meticulously catalogued and packed to ensure its safe passage. The statue was then loaded onto a French naval transport ship, the Eiffel, for its voyage to the United States. The journey across the ocean was long and uneventful, but filled with anticipation. Upon its arrival in New York Harbor, the ship was met with great excitement. The disassembled pieces of the statue were then transported to Bedloe's Island, which would eventually be renamed Liberty Island. This was a crucial step, as the island was to be the statue's permanent home. The arrival of the statue's components marked the beginning of the final phase of the project, its reassembly and erection on American soil. The journey from Paris to New York was not just a physical one. It was a symbolic passage, bringing the ideals of liberty and friendship to a new continent. The statue, though in pieces, carried with it the hopes and dreams of many, ready to be reassembled into a beacon of freedom for all to see. The careful planning and execution of this transportation phase were essential to the success of the entire project, ensuring that the magnificent work of art would reach its destination safely and be ready for its grand unveiling. The arrival of the Eiffel in New York Harbor was a moment of great celebration, a clear sign that the long-awaited monument was finally here, ready to take its place in history. The process of disassembling and transporting the statue was a complex logistical challenge, but it was executed with precision and care, reflecting the immense importance of the cargo. Each crate held a piece of history, a fragment of a dream that was soon to become a reality. The journey was a testament to the collaborative spirit between France and the United States, a shared endeavor that transcended geographical boundaries. The statue's voyage was a quiet but significant chapter in its story, a prelude to its grand unveiling and its enduring legacy as a symbol of freedom and democracy. The careful handling of each component ensured that the statue would arrive in perfect condition, ready to be reassembled and stand tall as a testament to international friendship and shared ideals. The sea journey was a period of waiting, of anticipation, as the pieces of the future icon made their way across the vast ocean, bringing with them the promise of a new symbol for a new world. The arrival was not just a delivery. It was a homecoming, a moment when the dream began to truly take root in its destined location. The disassembling and shipping were as much a part of the statue's narrative as its creation and assembly, each step a vital link in the chain of its remarkable history. The voyage was a quiet testament to the immense effort and planning that went into every stage of the project, ensuring that the statue would eventually stand proudly in its new home, a beacon of hope and inspiration for generations to come. The journey was long, but the destination was worth the wait, as the pieces of the Statue of Liberty finally arrived, ready to be united into a symbol that would forever grace the shores of America. The anticipation built with each passing day, until finally, the ship carrying the precious cargo docked, marking a pivotal moment in the statue's long and storied history. The careful preparation for the journey ensured that the statue, though in many parts, would arrive safely and be ready for its final transformation into a unified and majestic symbol of liberty. The voyage was a testament to the meticulous planning and dedication of all involved, ensuring that the statue's journey was as successful as its creation. The arrival of the ship was a cause for celebration, a clear indication that the dream was now within reach, ready to be realized on American soil. The pieces of the statue, once scattered, were now together, poised for their grand reassembly and their eternal vigil over New York Harbor. The journey was complete, and the stage was set for the final act of this monumental undertaking. The pedestal for the Statue of Liberty was a crucial component of the entire project. It was not just a simple base. It was a carefully designed and constructed foundation that would support the immense weight of the statue and elevate it to its intended height. The location chosen for this important structure was Bedloe/S Island, a small piece of land situated in New York Harbor. This island was selected for its strategic position, offering a prominent and visible spot for the statue to stand as a welcoming symbol to all who arrived in the United States. The design of the pedestal was a collaborative effort, much like the statue itself. The initial architectural plans were drawn up by an American architect named Richard Morris Hunt. His design was intended to complement the statue, providing a strong and dignified base without overshadowing the main work of art. The pedestal was designed to be a substantial structure, built from concrete and granite. These materials were chosen for their strength and durability, ensuring that the pedestal would be able to withstand the elements and the passage of time. The construction of the pedestal was a significant engineering feat in itself, requiring a deep foundation to support the massive weight it would bear. The construction of the pedestal faced several challenges, primarily related to funding. As mentioned earlier, raising money for the pedestal proved to be more difficult than raising money for the statue itself. This was due to various reasons, including public skepticism about why Americans should pay for the base of a gift. Despite these financial hurdles, the work eventually began. The process involved laying a massive concrete foundation, which was then covered with granite blocks. These blocks were carefully cut and fitted together, forming the sturdy walls of the pedestal. The construction was slow and deliberate, as each layer had to be precisely placed to ensure the stability and integrity of the entire structure. One of the most significant aspects of the pedestal/S construction was the involvement of General Charles P. Stone. He was an American engineer and a former Union Army officer, and he was appointed as the chief engineer for the pedestal project. Stone/S role was critical in overseeing the construction and ensuring that the engineering aspects were sound. He brought his military precision and engineering expertise to the project, managing the complex logistics of materials and labor. His leadership was instrumental in overcoming the challenges faced during the construction phase, and he played a vital role in bringing the pedestal to completion. The pedestal was designed not only for structural support but also to house various facilities. Inside the pedestal, there were spaces for offices, a museum, and observation decks. These areas were intended to provide visitors with an opportunity to learn about the statue-S history and to enjoy panoramic views of New York Harbor. The inclusion of these facilities made the pedestal more than just a base. It made it an integral part of the visitor experience, adding to the educational and recreational value of the monument. The construction of the pedestal was a long and arduous process, but it was a necessary one. Without a strong and stable base, the Statue of Liberty could not have stood tall in New York Harbor. The completion of the pedestal marked a significant milestone in the overall project, signaling that the site was finally ready to receive the statue itself. It was a testament to the perseverance of those involved, who worked tirelessly to overcome financial and logistical obstacles to ensure that the foundation for this iconic symbol of liberty was firmly in place. The pedestal, though often overlooked in favor of the statue it supports, is an equally important part of the monument-S story, representing the American contribution to this grand gift of friendship. Its construction was a story of its own, a story of engineering, fundraising, and the determination to provide a fitting home for a symbol of freedom. The careful planning and execution of the pedestal-S construction ensured that it would not only serve its practical purpose but also stand as a monument in its own right, a testament to the enduring spirit of collaboration and the shared ideals that brought the Statue of Liberty to life. The pedestal was more than just a foundation. It was a symbol of American commitment, a solid base upon which the ideals of liberty and democracy could stand tall for generations to come. The process was slow, but every stone laid, every layer added, brought the project closer to its ultimate goal, ensuring that the Statue of Liberty would have a secure and dignified home in the heart of New York Harbor. The completion of the pedestal was a moment of quiet triumph, a silent promise that the grand vision was soon to be fully realized. With the pedestal ready on Bedtime-S Island, the stage was set for the final and most anticipated phase of the Statue of Liberty project, the reassembly and erection of the statue itself. This was a monumental task, requiring careful planning, precise execution, and the coordination of many skilled workers. The disassembled pieces of the statue, which had arrived from France in over 200 crates, now had to be put back together, piece by painstaking piece, to form the iconic monument we know today. The reassembly process began with the internal iron framework, designed by Gustave Eiffel. This intricate skeleton was the backbone of the statue, providing the necessary support for its copper skin. Workers meticulously bolted and riveted the iron beams together, following Eiffel-S detailed plans. As the framework rose, it began to give a sense of the statue-S immense scale. Once the internal structure was in place, the copper sections of the statue were carefully lifted and attached to the framework. This was a delicate operation, as each copper piece had to be precisely aligned and secured. The workers used scaffolding to reach the higher sections, slowly building up the statue from its base. The process was like assembling a giant, three-dimensional puzzle, with each piece fitting perfectly into its designated spot. One of the most challenging aspects of the reassembly was working at height. As the statue grew taller, the workers had to contend with strong winds and the dizzying heights. Safety measures were in place, but the work remained inherently dangerous. Despite these challenges, the workers persevered, driven by the knowledge that they were building a symbol of freedom and hope. The construction site on Bedtime-S Island became a hive of activity, with the sounds of hammering, riveting, and the shouts of workers filling the air. Visitors would often come to the island to witness the progress, marveling at the gradual emergence of the colossal figure. The reassembly process took several months. Slowly but surely, the statue began to take its familiar form. The body sections were attached, then the arm holding the torch, and finally the head with its distinctive crown. Each completed section was a cause for celebration, a visible sign of progress towards the grand unveiling. The final touches involved securing all the copper plates, ensuring that the statue was structurally sound and ready to withstand the elements for centuries to come. The work was not just about physical construction. It was about bringing a dream to life, transforming individual pieces into a unified and powerful symbol. On October 28, 1886, the Statue of Liberty was officially dedicated. This was a day of immense celebration in New York City. A grand parade was held, with thousands of people lining the streets to witness the historic event. Boats filled New York Harbor, their horns blaring in salute to the newly completed monument. Dignitaries from both France and the United States were present, including President Grover Cleveland, who formally accepted the statue on behalf of the American people. Speeches were given, emphasizing the enduring friendship between the two nations and the ideals of liberty and democracy that the statue represented. The weather on dedication day was not ideal. It was foggy and rainy, which obscured the view of the statue for many. However, this did not dampen the spirits of the crowd. The unveiling of the statue, with a large French flag draped over its face, was the highlight of the ceremony. As the flag was pulled away, revealing the majestic figure, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. The Statue of Liberty, now fully assembled and standing proudly on its pedestal, was finally ready to fulfill its purpose as a beacon of hope and a symbol of freedom for all who saw her. The dedication ceremony marked the culmination of years of effort, fundraising, and construction, a testament to the perseverance and shared vision of countless individuals. It was a moment that etched itself into the history of both nations, a lasting symbol of their bond and their commitment to the ideals of liberty. The statue, now complete, stood as a silent guardian, welcoming immigrants and inspiring generations with its message of freedom and opportunity. The journey was long, but the destination was worth the wait, as the Statue of Liberty took its rightful place as one of the world's most recognizable and beloved landmarks. The Statue of Liberty stands today, a familiar sight in New York Harbor. It has been there for many years, observing the passage of time and the changes in the world around it. It has seen many events, both large and small, and has remained a constant presence. It is a quiet observer, always there, always watching. The statue has become a part of the landscape, a part of the city, and a part of the country. It is a symbol that many people recognize, and it holds a certain meaning for them. It represents ideas that are important to many, such as freedom and the possibility of new beginnings. For many who arrived in this country, the statue was one of the first things they saw. It was a sign that they had reached their destination, a place where they hoped to find a better life. The statue has also gained recognition around the world. It is known in many places as a representation of certain values. It reminds people of the idea of freedom and the hope for a peaceful world. It is a symbol that can be understood by people from different backgrounds, speaking a common language of aspiration. Over the years, the statue has undergone maintenance and repairs. It has been cleaned and strengthened to ensure its continued existence. These efforts have been carried out by individuals who understand the importance of the statue and its place in history. The statue continues to be a place that many people visit. They come to see it, to learn about its past, and to experience its presence. It is a place that can evoke a sense of calm and contemplation. The story of the Statue of Liberty is a long one, beginning with a simple idea and growing into a widely recognized symbol. It is a story of cooperation and the realization of a vision. It is a story that continues to be shared, and it will likely continue to be shared for a long time to come. As long as certain ideas remain important, the Statue of Liberty will likely remain a visible reminder of them. It stands as a steady light, a quiet presence, and a continuous reminder of enduring concepts. The story of the Statue of Liberty is now complete in this telling. Its presence, however, continues on, day after day, year after year, a silent and unchanging fixture in the harbor. It is simply there, and it will continue to be there for the foreseeable future. The story has been told, and the statue remains.
Hi guys, let's talk about where regular folks slept in England back in the Middle Ages, say around the 1300s or 1400s. It wasn't like today. Most people didn't have separate rooms just for sleeping. Instead, almost everything happened in one main room. This was the main space in their house. The house was usually pretty small and not fancy at all. Many houses were built using a method called half-timbering. That means the frame was made of wood beams you could see, and the spaces in between were filled with a mix of woven sticks and mud or clay, which they called wattle and daub. The roof was often covered in thatch. Thatch is just dried reeds or straw bundled together tightly. It was common stuff. Houses like this were everywhere, in little villages scattered across the countryside. Places maybe a day's walk from something big like Stonehenge, though people then probably just thought of those stones as some old rocks. Not a big deal. You'd find them inside old walled towns too, like within the walls of York or London, squeezed close together. This one main room was where life happened during the day. People cooked their meals over a fire in a fireplace built into the wall, called a hearth. The hearth was important because it gave heat and light. They ate their food in this room. They fixed their tools, or maybe did some weaving here. Kids played on the floor if it wasn't too crowded. Animals might sometimes be brought inside if it was very cold, especially in smaller farmhouses. It was a busy place when the sun was up. When it got dark, which happened early, especially in winter, things changed. Without good lights, maybe just a dim rushlight, a reed soaked in fat, or the glow from the hearth's embers, doing much was hard. So people went to sleep. And guess what? They slept right there in that same main room where they did everything else. Everyone slept together in this space. The whole family. That meant mom and dad, all the kids, maybe a grandma or grandpa if they lived there, and sometimes even a servant or a farm worker if the family had one. Privacy, like having your own bedroom, wasn't something most people thought about or could afford. They all just bedded down together on the floor of the living space. It was normal. Imagine a family of 6 or 8 people, maybe more, all settling down for the night in one room that also smelled a bit like the dinner they cooked and the smoke from the fire. The air could get pretty thick, especially since chimneys weren't always great at letting all the smoke out. The walls might be damp sometimes because of the English weather, which is often rainy. So where did they actually sleep? Well, it wasn't usually on a raised bed with a mattress like we know it. Those cost money and took up space. For most regular people, the floor was the sleeping spot. But they didn't just lie down on the hard, packed earth or stone floor directly. That would be cold and uncomfortable. Instead, they spread out a layer of straw or dried rushes all over the floor where they slept. Rushes are like tough grasses that grow near water. Sometimes, if they were doing a bit better, they might have a rough cloth sack or a big bag stuffed with straw or dry leaves. This sack was their mattress. People called this kind of bedding a straw pallet, or just the straw. After the harvest time, the straw might be newer and fresher. Other times, especially later in the winter, it might be old, broken down, and kind of dusty or crumbly. They didn't change it super often. They'd just sweep out the worst of it and add new straw on top sometimes, or replace a big bunch when it got too lumpy or smelly. That was about as comfortable as sleeping got for most folks in that one room. Nobody expected fancy beds. The fire in the hearth would slowly die down to just glowing embers as the night went on. The room would get colder. It would get very dark, except for maybe the faintest red glow from the hearth or the tiny, flickering light of a rushlight, if someone had bothered to light one, which they often didn't, to save the fat. Everyone would huddle down on their bit of the straw. They might pull rough wool blankets over themselves, or just use their outer clothes or cloaks as covers. People back then wore more layers of simple wool clothes day and night anyway. Then, they would try to sleep until the morning light came through the small, often unglazed windows, covered maybe with oiled cloth or a wooden shutter, or until something woke them up. A baby crying, someone snoring, the cold, animals outside, or needing to use the outdoor toilet area, which was just a pit or a ditch somewhere away from the house. It wasn't complicated. One room, one space for cooking, eating, working, and sleeping. One shared pile of straw on the floor. That was the normal, everyday setup for a huge number of people living in England during those centuries. Whether you lived in a tiny hamlet near the old stones of Stonehenge on Salisbury Plain, or in a cramped lane within sight of the huge York Minster Cathedral, or along the Thames near London Bridge, if you were an ordinary person, this single-room living and sleeping was likely your reality. The big churches or castles were places you saw, maybe even worked on, but they weren't where you slept. You slept on the straw on the floor in your one room. When morning came, you got up, stirred the fire, and started the day right there again. It was simple, crowded, and just how things were done back then. People didn't know anything different, so they didn't complain much about it. It was normal life. The sounds of the night were the sounds of your family breathing. Maybe the wind whistling through gaps in the wattle and daub, or an animal outside, and the crackle of the dying fire. Then morning came, and it was time to get up and work. Usually starting by getting the fire going again in the same hearth right there in the same room where everyone had just been sleeping. The straw might be kicked aside a bit or left there until later. There wasn't a big routine of making beds like today. You just got up and started the day. The room switched from sleeping space back to living space pretty quickly. The smell of smoke and maybe cooking would replace the quiet smells of the night. It was all the same place. That's how it was for most folks sleeping in medieval England. Not much changed day to day. It was just life in that one room, on the straw. Simple, crowded, normal. Nothing exciting to report, really. Just people trying to rest in the space they had, using what they had, which wasn't much beyond the basics. The big famous places like the Tower of London or Canterbury Cathedral were far away from the daily reality of sleeping on a straw pallet in a smoky, single-room house in a village or a crowded town street. Those landmarks existed, but they didn't change how ordinary people slept. They slept on the floor, together, in the main room. That's the main point. Day in, day out, for generations. The straw got replaced sometimes. The people grew up and had kids who also slept on the straw. The thatch roof needed fixing now and then. The wattle and daub might need patching after heavy English rain. But the way of sleeping, in that one room together, stayed pretty much the same for a long, long time. It was just the way it was done. Nothing fancy. Nothing complicated. Just sleep where you live, with everyone else. End of story for how most people slept in medieval England. At least that's the first part about where they slept. It wasn't special. It was normal life back then. The room was small. The air was smoky sometimes. The straw got old, but it was home, and it was where they slept. every night, in England, during the Middle Ages, in houses made of wood and mud and straw, under thatch roofs, near places we now think of as important, but which were just part of the landscape to them, like Stonehenge, or the big walls around York, or the river in London, just places, while they slept on straw on the floor in their one room. That's it. That's how it was for sleeping for most people. Simple and straightforward, no extra frills, just the basics. Sleep, get up, work, sleep again, in the same space, with everyone, on the straw, night after night, year after year, in medieval England. Okay, that covers the place. It was just the main room. One room for everything, including sleep, for almost everyone who wasn't rich, which was most people. So most people slept like this, on the floor, on straw, together, in England, back then. The end of this part. Morning would come, and they'd start over. But that's not part of the sleeping part. That's later. For now, they were asleep, on the straw, in the room, together, in medieval England. That's the first thing about how they slept. Where? It was the main room. All right. Let's move on from where people slept to what they actually slept on back in medieval England, especially around places like London or Canterbury. For most regular folks, the fancy beds you might picture weren't really part of their lives. Forget mattresses stuffed with feathers or springs. What people used was much simpler and honestly, pretty basic. Think about that main room we talked about last time. The floor was often just packed earth. Maybe some stone if you were in a slightly better house in a town like York near the old walls, or near the Thames in London. Lying straight on that hard surface all night. Not comfortable, not warm. So people put down a layer of stuff. The most common thing was straw. Dry straw, spread out in a thickish layer in the corner or along the wall where the family slept. Sometimes it was dried rushes, which are like tough grasses you find near rivers, maybe even gathered down by the Fleet Ditch in London before it got really bad. This stuff was cheap and available, especially after the harvest. Farmers had plenty. They called this bedding a pallet, or just the straw. It wasn't fancy. After a while, the straw would get broken down, dusty, and probably itchy. It might start to smell, especially if the room was damp from the English rain, or if small critters found it cozy. People didn't change it every day. Maybe they'd sweep out the worst bits sometimes and throw down some fresh straw on top, or replace a big chunk of it when it got too gross or lumpy. Comfort wasn't the main goal. It was about having something between you and the cold, hard floor. For slightly better off families, maybe a craftsman living near the shambles in York, or a shopkeeper on a London lane, they might have a rough sack made of cheap cloth, like hemp or coarse linen. They'd stuff this sack with straw, dried leaves, or maybe even dried ferns or moss gathered from the woods. This was a step up from just loose straw on the floor. It was called a straw tick, or a mattress, but it was still pretty lumpy and scratchy. You'd toss this stuffed sack onto the straw layer, or sometimes onto a simple wooden frame if they had one. A basic platform off the ground, maybe just a foot high. This kept you a tiny bit further from drafts and dirt on the floor. But mostly, it was still straw inside. Wool was a big deal in England back then. Sheep were everywhere. So sometimes, if a family had a bit more, they might have a thin mattress stuffed with wool clippings or waste wool. This was definitely softer and warmer than straw, but it was still nothing like a modern mattress. It could get lumpy and compacted over time. Even these wool mattresses weren't super common for average folks. Straw was king. What did they cover up with? Blankets were usually made of wool, too. Rough, scratchy wool blankets. They weren't thick and fluffy like we have now. They were woven simply and were pretty heavy and stiff, especially when they got damp in the humid English air. Sometimes people just used their heavy outer cloaks or extra layers of their regular wool clothing as covers. Rich folks had fur covers or finer woolen blankets, maybe even linen sheets. But for the person living in a small house near Canterbury Cathedral or walking past the Tower of London every day, thick, scratchy wool was the nighttime standard. Pillows? Mostly not a thing. Seriously. The idea of a soft pillow for your head wasn't universal. Many people, especially the less well-off, just bundled up a piece of their clothing, like a tunic or a cloak, and used that to rest their head on. Maybe they had a small sack stuffed with straw or husks. Real pillows stuffed with feathers or down were a luxury item, mostly for the wealthy or perhaps seen by common folks inside the grand churches, like Westminster Abbey during services, but not in their own homes at night. You made do with what you had, which often meant resting your head on your arm or a rolled-up piece of cloth. So picture it. In a dim, smoky room in a half-timbered house somewhere in England, maybe hearing the bells from St. Paul's in London or smelling the River Ouse in York, a family settles down for the night. They lie down on a crackling layer of old straw, or maybe on a scratchy sack filled with more straw. They pull rough, heavy wool blankets over themselves. Their heads rest on a folded tunic. The air might be chilly and damp. The straw rustles. It might itch. It wasn't soft. It wasn't what we'd call comfortable, but it was what most people had. It was their bed. Night after night, year after year. The straw got replaced eventually. The blankets wore thin, but the basics stayed pretty much the same. Straw for padding, wool for warmth, the floor or a simple platform, and whatever was handy for your head. That was sleeping comfort for the average person in medieval England. No frills, just the simplest way to get off the cold ground and try to get some rest before another long day of work in the fields, or a shop, or down by the docks on the Thames. It was functional, not fancy. And that's pretty much all there was to it for a huge number of people living back then. The big castles and cathedrals stood tall, but inside the small homes, sleep happened on scratchy, simple bedding made from whatever was cheap and available locally. Straw from the fields, wool from the sheep, simple cloth. That was the recipe for a medieval English bed for the common man, woman, and child. Nothing exciting to report, really. Just the way it was. They didn't know any different, so they didn't complain much. It was just part of life, sleeping on scratchy straw under scratchy wool in a room that smelled like smoke and damp earth somewhere in England during those centuries. Okay, that covers what they slept on. Next time, maybe where the slightly richer folks slept. But for now, that's the straw and wool reality for most. The end of this part about bedding. Let's talk about what they actually wore when they slept back in medieval England, say around the 1300s or 1400s. The simple answer is that most regular folks didn't really have special clothes just for sleeping. Not like pajamas or nightgowns we might think of today. For the average person living in a small village near a place like Canterbury Cathedral or in a crowded lane not far from the old London Wall, nighttime clothing was usually just their daytime clothing, maybe with some adjustments. It was a practical thing. People back then wore layers of simple clothes made mostly from wool. Wool was everywhere because England had a lot of sheep. It was the main fabric. Linen was used too, especially for the layer right next to the skin, like an undershirt. But wool was king for warmth, even when it got damp from the frequent English rain or fog rolling in off the Thames or the Ouse in York. A man might typically wear a long shirt called a tunic, some simple trousers or leggings made from wool or rough cloth, and perhaps a heavier woolen cloak or outer coat for colder days. Women wore long dresses or tunics, often with an overdress on top, and maybe a head covering like a wimple or a simple kerchief to keep their hair tidy and their head a bit warmer. When it was time to sleep in that one main room everyone shared, people wouldn't usually get completely undressed. There were a few reasons for this. First, it was often cold, especially in winter. The fire in the hearth would die down to embers, and drafts came through the gaps in the wattle and daub walls under the door, or through the oiled cloth covering window holes. Places like the Cotswolds or up near York could get pretty chilly at night. Second, getting undressed completely wasn't always practical or considered necessary. Privacy was very limited, with everyone sleeping together in the same room. Parents, kids, maybe grandparents or a servant. Changing clothes fully just wasn't something done much at night. Third, it was faster and easier. So what most people did was take off their outer layers. They might remove their shoes, if they had any beyond simple leather wraps or wooden pattens for muddy streets. They might take off their belt, and perhaps their heavy outer wool tunic or overdress. But the basic underlayer, like the long shirt or smock, usually stayed on. This long shirt, often made of linen or coarse wool, was essentially their underwear and also their base layer for sleeping. It wasn't special sleepwear. It was just the clothes they had on under everything else. Sometimes, if it wasn't too cold, maybe on a rare warm summer night down near the coast in Sussex or Kent, they might take off their outer wool tunic or dress and just sleep in that long undershirt or smock. But very often, especially in the colder months, which were most of the year in England, they would sleep in most of their day clothes. They might pull their wool cloak over themselves like an extra blanket, or use a rough sackcloth covering. The main idea was to stay warm enough to sleep, not to be comfortable in fancy sleep clothes. Comfort wasn't really the big goal. Survival, avoiding freezing, and getting some basic rest were the priorities. So you'd see folks bedding down on their straw pallet, wearing their wool leggings and their tunic, or their wool dress, maybe loosened a bit at the neck or waist, but still very much on. Their head covering, like the kerchief or coif, might stay on too, for extra warmth on their head and ears in the drafty room. Even their stockings or hose might stay on their feet. For little kids, it was much the same. They wore smaller versions of adult clothes, simple tunics or smocks made from whatever fabric was available, often hand-me-downs or rough homespun wool. They usually slept in these clothes too. Babies might be swaddled tightly in long linen strips, which was a common practice people thought helped them grow straight and kept them warm and secure, preventing them from startling themselves awake. Then the swaddled baby would be placed near their mother on the straw for warmth and feeding during the night. Now, for the folks who were a bit better off, maybe a merchant living near the Guildhall in London, or a minor landowner in a village within sight of York Minster, or the walls of Chester, things might be slightly different. They might afford a separate sleeping space, even if it was just a corner curtained off in a larger room. They might have access to finer, softer linen for their undergarments. They might have a specific, looser shirt or a simple gown made of linen that they wore only for sleeping. But even for these slightly richer people, it wasn't usually a radically different outfit bought just for bed. It was often just a cleaner, perhaps longer or less worn-out version of their basic undertunic. Not something you'd find in a special store called sleepwear. They still relied on layers and heavy wool blankets for warmth. The very wealthy, like lords living in castles like Windsor or Warwick, or bishops in palaces near cathedrals like Lincoln or Durham, definitely had proper nightshirts and maybe even robes, often made from finer linen or even imported silk. These might be seen by servants or glimpsed during rare visits, but that world of silk nightwear was completely separate from the reality of the common person living near the Thames docks in Southwark or farming near Stonehenge on Salisbury Plain. Their scratchy wool was the nighttime standard. A big reason for sleeping in day clothes was simple practicality. Getting fully dressed in the dark, cold morning, especially in a single room with only the faintest gray light coming through an oiled cloth window or a crack in the shutters, was difficult and time-consuming. Candles or rushlights cost money. If you were already wearing most of your clothes, your smock, your tunic, your leggings, you could just get up, pull on your outer tunic or dress over it, fasten your belt, slip on your shoes or pattens, and start your day much quicker. This was important when your day started before dawn. Also, clothes weren't washed very often. Water had to be hauled, heated over the fire, and washing took time and effort. Wool, especially the thick outer layers, wasn't easy to clean frequently and could shrink or felt. Linen undershirts might be washed more, but still not daily. So wearing them day and night wasn't seen as particularly strange or overly dirty by the standards of the time. Lice and fleas were common facts of life for everyone, rich or poor. Sleeping in fine feather beds in castles like the Tower of London, or on straw in a hut near Runnymede, partly because of the infrequent washing of bodies and clothes. The scratchiness of the wool was just part of life. So picture a family settling down for the night in their half-timbered house somewhere in England. The bells from the local parish church, maybe Saint Mary Le Bow in London, or a smaller, simpler church in a village near Hadrian's Wall, have rung for curfew, signaling it's time to be indoors. The room is dark, except for the faint red glow from the hearth's embers. They kick off their rough leather shoes, or set aside their wooden pattens near the door. Dad takes off his belt and his heavy outer wool tunic, folding it roughly or just dropping it nearby. He sleeps in his woolen leggings and his long linen shirt. Mom might loosen the laces or ties on her wool dress, but keeps it on over her smock, perhaps keeping her head kerchief tied for warmth. The older kids curl up in their smaller tunics and leggings. The younger ones might just be in their smocks. They pull the scratchy, heavy wool blankets over themselves. No one changes into special soft pajamas. The clothes they worked in the fields near Glastonbury Tor, or sold goods in a stall near London Bridge, or mended nets by the coast, are the same clothes they sleep in. It was just simpler, warmer, saved time, and was more practical given the lack of privacy and the cold. And that was pretty much it for sleepwear for most people across England during those centuries. Nothing fancy, nothing special. Just the same basic layers they wore during the day, slightly adjusted for lying down. It got the job done. They didn't lie awake wishing for cotton pajamas. They just slept in what they had on. If they woke up cold in the middle of the night, shivering in the damp air common near places like the Fens or the Lake District, they'd pull the rough blanket tighter or huddle closer to a family member or the dying warmth of the hearth. The wool clothes provided some barrier against the chill, even if they were scratchy and smelled of wood smoke and daily toil. Morning would come, gray light slowly filtering through the oiled cloth covering the window hole, and they'd stand up, pull on their outer tunic or dress over the slept-in underlayer, fasten their belt, slip on their shoes, and the clothes they slept in became the clothes they worked in again. Day in, day out. The linen smock or shirt might get changed eventually, when it was deemed necessary, or perhaps on a Sunday before church near a place like Salisbury Cathedral. But the wool layers? They were worn and slept in repeatedly, week after week. It was just how things were done. No big deal. No special routines or fancy garments. Sleep, get up, work, sleep again, mostly in the same clothes. Simple, practical. Not too comfortable by modern standards, but completely normal and unremarkable for the time in England. The big churches stood tall, casting shadows. The castles loomed on hills over towns. But inside the countless small homes, people slept in their work clothes. That's the unexciting reality for sleepwear back then. Nothing too complicated about it. Just people using what they had, day and night. Okay, that covers what they wore to bed. Or rather, what they didn't change out of for bed. End of this part about nighttime clothes. Let's talk about where the richer folks slept back in medieval England. This means people like lords living in castles, well-off merchants in towns like London or York, maybe some higher-up church people near places like Canterbury Cathedral or Westminster Abbey. Their sleeping situation was definitely different from the common folks in their one smoky room. It wasn't all super fancy like in movies, but it was a step up. First off, these people usually had a separate room just for sleeping. It wasn't always huge, but it was their own space, away from the main hall or the kitchen. In a big stone castle, like Windsor Castle or Warwick Castle, the lord and lady might have a private chamber, often called a solar. This room was usually up high in a tower or off the main hall, maybe overlooking the castle courtyard or the Thames River if it was near water. It offered some quiet and privacy. In a townhouse belonging to a successful merchant near the Guildhall in London or the Shambles in York, the master and mistress of the house would likely have their own bedchamber on an upper floor, away from the shop or the servants below. Even hearing the bells from St. Paul's or York Minster felt a bit different when you were in your own room. Inside this room, the main thing was the bed. It wasn't a mattress on the floor. It was a proper wooden bed frame. These frames were often big and heavy, made from strong English oak. They were raised quite high off the floor, sometimes needing steps to get into them. This kept them away from drafts and dirt. The frame held ropes stretched tightly across it, forming a sort of base. On top of these ropes, they placed a mattress. But this mattress wasn't stuffed with straw like the common folks used. It was stuffed with softer things. Goose or duck feathers were the best, making it soft and warm. Sometimes they used wool, but a much finer, cleaner wool than the scratchy blankets others used. This feather bed was a big sign of being rich. Around this bed, there were often curtains, heavy cloth hangings, maybe made of wool or even velvet for the very rich, hung from the bed frame or from a special frame around the bed, called a canopy. These curtains could be pulled shut all the way around the bed. This did a few things. First, it kept out drafts, which was important in cold stone castles or drafty townhouses, especially during damp English winters near places like the Fens or the Lake District. Second, it gave privacy, especially if servants came into the room. Third, it kept out insects, though bugs were still a problem everywhere. The curtains might have fancy patterns or even pictures woven into them. Closing yourself into this little cloth room at night was pretty much the height of comfort back then. The bedding itself was also better. Instead of rough wool blankets, they had sheets made of linen. Linen was smoother and felt nicer against the skin than scratchy wool. Then, on top of the sheets, they had blankets, but again, finer wool ones, maybe even woven in places like the Cotswolds known for good wool. And then, for extra warmth or show, they might have a coverlet. This could be a brightly colored woven blanket, or even one stuffed with feathers, like a big quilt. Pillows were a thing here too. They weren't sacks of straw. They were stuffed with feathers, soft and comfortable for your head. They might have pillowcases made of linen too. The room itself might have a few other things. Maybe a chest for storing clothes and valuables, often locked. Perhaps a small table and a stool. There might be a fireplace to keep the room warm, which was a huge luxury. A fireplace meant you didn't have to rely on the main hall fire downstairs. A servant would come in to tend it. Windows might have shutters to keep out the cold and dark, and sometimes even panes of glass, which was incredibly expensive and rare. Mostly, it was just shutters or maybe oiled cloth. If you were a bishop living near Durham Cathedral, you might have slightly nicer glass. Rushes or straw were still sometimes strewn on the floor, but it was cleaner straw, changed more often, and maybe even sprinkled with herbs to smell nicer. But it was still straw on the floor. Life wasn't perfectly quiet, though. Even in a private chamber in the Tower of London, you might hear guards changing watch, horses in the courtyard, or the general noise of the city or castle outside. But it was definitely quieter than sleeping in the main hall with dozens of people. Getting ready for bed might involve a servant bringing warm water to wash your face and hands. You might change into a special nightshirt, a long linen garment, instead of sleeping in your day clothes. This was another sign of wealth, having clothes just for sleeping. The lord or lady would climb into the high bed. The curtains might be drawn shut by a servant, and a candle or small oil lamp might be left burning low for a little while, casting flickering shadows on the stone walls or timbered ceiling before being blown out. Waking up was different too. A servant might come in to open the shutters, rebuild the fire, and bring warm water again. You'd get dressed in your proper clothes for the day, maybe with help. It was a slower, more private start than jumping up from the straw and getting straight to work. For a rich merchant in Bristol looking out over the River Avon, or a lord waking up in his castle near Hadrian's Wall, this separate room with its big curtained bed was pretty much the best sleep you could get. It wasn't perfect by today's ideas, still drafty, still potentially buggy, still smelling a bit of smoke and rushes, but compared to sleeping on straw in the main room, it was a world apart. It showed your status. Having your own sleeping space, a big soft bed with curtains, and fine linen sheets was what being wealthy meant for sleep in medieval England. It wasn't for everyone, just the people with money or power. Everyone else made do with the floor or a simple straw tick in the common room. But for those who could afford it, this was the way. A quiet room, a high bed, curtains drawn. That was comfortable sleeping back then. Okay. That covers where the better off people slept. So, people in medieval England went to sleep when it got dark. Mostly. But the night wasn't always just one long stretch of sleep until morning, like we often think of it today. Especially for regular folk sleeping in that one main room, the night could be broken up. It wasn't necessarily a solid 8 hours of quiet rest. First off, it was really dark. Like really dark. There wasn't street lighting outside your little half-timbered house in a village near Stonehenge or down some lane in London. Inside, after the hearth fire died down to embers, the only light might be from a small, dim rushlight, basically a reed soaked in animal fat, or maybe a tallow candle if the family could afford it, which many couldn't. These gave off a weak, flickering light and lots of smoke. They weren't left burning all night. They were expensive and a fire risk in houses made of wood, wattle, and daub with thatch roofs. So mostly people slept in near total darkness, especially away from the faint glow of the hearth. The only sounds might be the wind whistling through gaps in the walls near Hadrian's Wall, or the occasional animal noise outside, or the bells from a distant church like Saint Paul's in London tolling the hours if you were close enough to hear them. People woke up during the night for various reasons. One common reason was simply needing to use the toilet. Most houses didn't have indoor plumbing. Instead, people used a chamber pot kept in the corner of the room. It was just a simple pot. Using it in the dark, with everyone else sleeping nearby, was just part of life. The smell could get noticeable, especially towards morning. In towns like York, near the Ouse River, or London near the Fleet Ditch, the general smell outside wasn't great anyway, so an indoor pot wasn't the biggest issue. Someone would have to empty it outside in the morning, often into a communal ditch or cesspit. Not pleasant, but normal. Another reason to wake up was the cold. Especially in winter, the embers in the hearth might not give off enough heat. Drafts were common. Someone, often an adult, might need to get up to add more wood or peat to the fire to stop everyone from freezing. This meant stumbling around in the dark or by the faintest light, trying not to step on sleeping children or the family dog that might be curled up near the warmth. The damp English chill, seeping in from places like the fens or the moors, could be bone deep. Sometimes people woke up because they just woke up. Lying on a scratchy straw pallet under rough wool blankets wasn't always super comfortable. Maybe someone snored. Maybe a baby cried and needed feeding. Maybe you heard rats scurrying in the thatch above you, a common problem everywhere. From peasant cottages near Canterbury Cathedral to slightly better houses in Bristol. Maybe the straw was itchy, or maybe the noises of the city at night filtered in, the watch calling the hour near the London Wall, distant arguments, or animals moving in the street. In castles like the Tower of London, you might hear the changing of the guards or distant noises from the River Thames. There was also this idea that some people slept in two chunks. They might go to sleep soon after dark, sleep for a few hours, then wake up for an hour or so in the middle of the night. This watch period, as some called it, wasn't necessarily planned. People might lie awake quietly, talk softly with their spouse if they were awake, maybe pray, check on the children, have a simple snack like bread, or even do a quiet chore like mending by the faint firelight if they had a rushlight burning. Then, after this period of being awake, they would go back to sleep for the second half of the night until dawn. This wasn't everyone all the time, but it seems to have been a pattern for some people, especially before artificial lighting made long, unbroken nights more common. It was just a natural way the night sometimes unfolded. For the very religious, there were set prayers during the night. Monks in monasteries like Westminster Abbey would get up for services like matins in the middle of the night. Ordinary people living near such places might hear the bells calling the monks to prayer, but they usually didn't get up for formal prayers themselves unless they were particularly devout. More commonly, if someone woke up feeling scared or anxious, maybe from a bad dream or the howl of a wolf, rarer by the late Middle Ages, but still possible in remote areas, or just the general uncertainty of life, they might say a prayer quietly to themselves before trying to go back to sleep. Dawn came early in summer, late in winter. People generally got up with the light. There wasn't much point trying to do things in the dark. The first person up, often the woman of the house, would stir the embers in the hearth, add fuel, and get the fire going again. The smell of smoke would start to fill the room, replacing the quieter, colder smells of the night. The chamber pot would be taken out and emptied. The straw on the floor might be kicked aside or swept roughly. The room, which had been a sleeping space, quickly became the living and working space again. People put on their outer clothes over the layers they slept in, ate a simple breakfast, and started the day's work. The night was over. It hadn't been a silent, undisturbed movie sleep. It had been a practical, sometimes interrupted period of rest in a dark, often cold or uncomfortable environment, punctuated by the basic needs and noises of life in medieval England. Whether you were near the ancient stones of Avebury or hearing the bells of York Minster, the night brought its own rhythm, different from the day, but not always the deep, unbroken sleep we imagine. It was just how nights were back then. People accepted the interruptions and the darkness as normal parts of life. Okay. That covers how the night passed for sleeping folks back then. So, people back in medieval England didn't just sleep. They had some thoughts about it, and especially about dreams. It wasn't like today where we might just shrug off a weird dream. For them, sleep and dreams could mean something more, tied into their beliefs about the world, God, and the things they couldn't see. Most folks, Whether living near the old stones of Stonehenge on the Salisbury Plain, or in a cramped house hearing the bells of St. Paul's in London, believed sleep was necessary. It was when your body rested and got its strength back after a long day working in the fields near Canterbury, or hauling goods by the Thames docks. Without sleep, you couldn't work properly the next day. That was pretty much the basic, practical view. Going without sleep too long made you weak and fuzzy-headed, and everyone knew that from experience. But dreams were a different story. Many people thought dreams weren't just random nonsense. They could be messages. Sometimes people believed dreams came from God. A dream might be a warning about something bad that was going to happen, like sickness or a poor harvest. Or it could be a sign telling you to do something. Maybe go on a pilgrimage to a place like Canterbury Cathedral or give money to the church. Churchmen often talked about important dreams in the Bible, like Joseph's dreams, so the idea that God could speak through dreams was pretty common. If you had a really strong or scary dream, you might even go talk to your local priest about it near your parish church. Whether it was a grand one like York Minster or a small village church. On the other hand, people also worried that bad dreams could come from the devil or evil spirits. A nightmare wasn't just a bad dream. Some folks thought it was literally a mare, an evil spirit, sitting on your chest while you slept, making it hard to breathe and giving you frightening visions. People living near places associated with old stories, like the wild moors around Dartmoor or the deep forests near Sherwood, might be especially likely to think about spirits causing bad dreams. To protect themselves, some might say prayers before bed, or hang special herbs near where they slept, like over the straw pallet in the main room or near the curtained bed in a merchant's house in Bristol. There were also ideas about dreams predicting the future or revealing hidden truths. A dream about finding money might make someone hopeful about their luck turning around. A dream about a relative who had died might be seen as that person visiting from the afterlife, maybe giving advice or asking for prayers. This kind of thinking wasn't approved of by the church all the time, but it was pretty common among regular people trying to make sense of things. You might hear folks chatting about their dreams down by the River Ouse in York, or while waiting to sell goods at a market near London Bridge. People also paid attention to how they slept, sometimes. Sleeping on your right side was often thought to be better than sleeping on your left. Some old ideas, passed down from even earlier times, linked different sleeping positions to different moods or health. Doctors back then, who believed in things like bodily humors, might think too much sleep made you sluggish and cold, while not enough sleep made you hot and irritable. But for the average person sleeping on straw near Hadrian's Wall or in a Cotswold village, it was more about whether you felt rested or not, rather than complex medical theories. For most ordinary people, though, the main thing about sleep was still just the practical need to rest. Whether you were a fisherman sleeping in a hut near the coast, hearing the sea, or a blacksmith in Warwick near the castle snoring after a long day, you needed sleep to function. The thoughts about dreams and meanings were there, floating around, maybe discussed on a slow Sunday afternoon or after a strange night. But the daily reality was simpler. You worked hard. You got tired when the sun went down, helped along by the curfew bell in towns. You slept as best you could on whatever you had, and you got up to work again when it got light. The deep thoughts about God or spirits sending dreams were probably more for when a dream was really unusual or scary. Most nights, sleep was just sleep, a dark, quiet period to recover in their small, smoky homes scattered across England, from the damp fens to the rolling downs. It was a break from the hard work, and that was important enough on its own, without always looking for hidden messages. But the idea that dreams could mean something was always there in the background, part of how they saw the world. Okay. That covers some of what they thought about sleeping and dreaming. Children in medieval England slept pretty much like everyone else, just smaller. There wasn't a big fuss about special kid beds or routines. It was practical, fitting into the crowded single-room life most people had near places like Canterbury Cathedral or the bustling lanes of London. Babies were often swaddled. This meant they were wrapped tightly from shoulders to feet in long strips of linen cloth. People thought this helped the baby grow straight and kept them warm and secure. A swaddled baby couldn't move much. They were usually placed near their mother on the straw pallet, or sometimes in a simple wooden cradle if the family had one. The cradle might be pushed near the hearth for a bit of extra warmth during cold nights, especially in drafty houses near places like the damp fens or up north by Hadrian's Wall. The mother would feed the baby during the night as needed, right there in the main room. The smell of smoke and damp wool was just the normal air. Toddlers and little kids slept close to their parents or older siblings. They didn't have their own little beds. They just found a spot on the shared straw pallet on the floor. If the family had a simple raised bed, the younger children might sleep there with the parents, all crammed together. Privacy wasn't a thing. Everyone slept in the same space, hearing each other breathe, snore, or stir. A child might curl up near a slightly warmer spot, maybe closer to the dying embers of the hearth, or next to an older brother. Their clothes were simple versions of adult wear, wool tunics or smocks, and they usually slept in them, just like their parents did. Comfort wasn't the goal. Staying warm and out of the way was. If they woke up scared from a bad dream, maybe hearing owls near Sherwood Forest or the distant bells of York Minster, they might just whimper quietly or shuffle closer to a parent. There wasn't usually a lamp left on. It was dark, and they learned to cope. Older kids, the ones helping with chores or even apprentices living with a master craftsman near the Shambles in York or a shop in Southwark across the Thames from London, slept where space allowed. In their own home, they still shared the main room floor or a corner of the family bed. If they were servants or apprentices in another household, they slept where the master told them to. This could be on straw in a corner of the workshop, on the floor near the kitchen hearth, or even in a loft space if the building had one. It was functional sleeping, not comfortable. They used whatever blanket was spare, which might not be much. Sharing body heat was common. Getting enough sleep could be hard if they had early chores, like fetching water from the Thames or feeding animals before dawn near a place like Runnymede. Bedtime wasn't a strict ritual. When the adults decided it was time, often after the evening meal and as the light faded completely, everyone settled down. There weren't special bedtime stories like today. Maybe a parent would tell a familiar tale or sing a simple lullaby, but mostly, kids just got tired from the day's work or play and fell asleep when it got quiet and dark. The rhythm was set by daylight and the needs of the household. If the parents were mending clothes by the faint light of a rushlight, the kids might fall asleep to the sound of their voices talking about the day's events or worries about the harvest near Salisbury Plain. Sleeping through the night wasn't guaranteed for kids either. They got cold, the straw itched. They might wet the straw or their shared bedding. They could be woken by a younger sibling crying, a parent getting up to tend the fire or use the chamber pot, or noises from outside. Animals, the night watch calling in towns like London near the old wall, or the wind howling through the thatch on a cottage near Dartmoor. If they shared the space with animals brought in for warmth in winter, that added more smells and sounds. They learned to sleep through a lot, or just lie quietly awake in the dark until they drifted off again. There wasn't entertainment or comfort offered in the middle of the night. As children grew older, their sleeping arrangements changed slowly, if at all. A teenager might get a slightly better spot on the straw, maybe near the wall instead of the drafty door. If the family was doing a little better, perhaps a farmer with good land near the Cotswolds, or a shopkeeper in Bristol, an older child might even get a simple straw tick mattress of their own, but still placed on the floor in the common room. Only in very wealthy households, like those of merchants near the Guildhall or minor nobles visiting Westminster Abbey, would children have separate sleeping spaces or small beds with proper bedding? For the vast majority, childhood sleep meant sharing the crowded, often uncomfortable main living space with the whole family, night after night, year after year. It was simply how things were done. They didn't know anything different. They slept where they were put, in the clothes they wore, waking and sleeping to the rhythms of the household and the dark English night. Whether in a smoky hut near Stonehenge or a slightly larger house hearing the bells of Canterbury. It was unremarkable, just part of growing up. There wasn't a concept of a special children's bedtime. Sleep happened when the day ended and the room got dark and quiet enough. That was it. Okay? That covers how kids slept. Over time, the way people slept in England started changing, very slowly. This wasn't like flipping a switch. It took ages, creeping along over many years, even centuries, shifting bit by bit from how things were in the earlier Middle Ages. It wasn't dramatic, just a gradual drift towards something a little different by the time you get closer to, say, the 1500s or 1600s. Think of it like the Thames slowly changing its course over a very long time, not overnight. One of the biggest slow shifts was in the houses themselves, especially for folks who weren't dirt poor. More people, particularly in towns like London or Bristol, or successful farmers out in the countryside near places like the Cotswolds or East Anglia, began building houses with more than one room. Instead of just the single big hall where everything happened, you started seeing houses with separate spaces. This meant that sleeping could sometimes move out of the main living and cooking area. A family might have a small chamber, maybe upstairs or off to the side, just for sleeping. It wasn't always fancy, maybe just a partitioned corner or a loft space reached by a ladder. but it offered a bit more privacy than everyone sleeping together next to the hearth where the cooking smells and smoke lingered. Waking up near York Minster, you might still hear the city, but you weren't necessarily sharing your straw with the chickens anymore. The main room was still busy, but the sleepers were a bit apart. Along with more rooms came changes to the buildings themselves. Fireplaces with proper chimneys became more common, slowly replacing the old open hearths in the middle of the floor. This meant smoke could go up and out more efficiently. Sleeping in a room with a chimney meant less smoky air, which was probably a bit better for breathing, even if the room was still often chilly. Drafts were still a problem in houses made of wattle and daub near damp areas like the fens, but the air quality improved a tiny bit. Windows also saw slow improvements. While glass was still expensive, shutters became better fitted, and occasionally, small panes of glass might appear in the homes of wealthier merchants near the Guildhall in London, or prosperous wool traders in Salisbury, letting in a little light while keeping out more cold than just oiled cloth could. What people slept on also saw some minor evolution, though straw remained king for most. For families doing a bit better, simple wooden bed frames became slightly more common, even if they were just low platforms. This got people a few inches off the dirt or stone floor, away from some drafts and dampness. The straw pallet or tick mattress might be placed on this frame instead of directly on the ground. Feather mattresses, once only for the very rich like those living near Windsor Castle, started to trickle down a little further. A well-off yeoman farmer or a skilled craftsman in Norwich might save up for one, seeing it as a mark of comfort and status, though it was still a big investment. Wool blankets remained standard, but maybe a bit finer or thicker if the family could afford it. The idea of dedicated sleepwear also started to inch forward, but only for those with extra resources. While most people still slept in their day clothes or underclothes, the slightly wealthier might own a specific long linen shirt or a simple nightgown used only for sleeping. This was still far from common, but the concept of changing into something different for bed began to exist beyond just the nobility and their castles like Warwick. It was a small step towards separating sleep from the rest of the daily grind. Even the rhythm of the night might have shifted slightly for some. As more houses had better ways to light interiors cheaply, like slightly better candles, and perhaps a bit more security in growing towns or enclosed farmsteads, the old pattern of sleeping in two chunks with a wakeful period in the middle might have become less universal for some people. People might still wake up for practical reasons. A crying baby near Canterbury Cathedral, needing the chamber pot, adding fuel to the fire on a cold night near Hadrian's Wall. But the idea of a planned, quiet watching period in the middle of the night might have faded a bit for those who could afford to burn a light or felt safer. The strict tolling of the curfew bell in cities like London still dictated when respectable folks should be indoors, but the hours inside might have become a little more flexible for some. However, it's crucial to remember that these changes were incredibly slow and uneven. For a vast number of people, especially the rural poor, laborers in cities like York near the Ouse, or miners in the Peak District, life and sleep remained much as it had been centuries before. They still lived and slept in one or two cramped rooms. They still used straw pallets on the floor. They still slept in their day clothes for warmth. They still dealt with cold, drafts, insects, and interruptions. The grand cathedrals like St. Paul's might be rebuilt in new styles, but the sleep of the common person nearby changed far less dramatically. Progress was glacial and mostly benefited those already better off. So by the time you get towards the end of what we loosely call the Middle Ages and into the early modern period, sleeping in England wasn't completely stuck in the past. There were small movements towards more privacy, slightly better bedding for some, cleaner air indoors, and perhaps a tiny bit more comfort. But it was a crawl, not a leap. The basics: finding a spot, getting warm, trying to rest in a world without electric lights or central heating, remained the core experience for the majority, night after night, year after year, whether they were falling asleep to the sound of the Thames or the wind over the Salisbury Plain. The changes were real, but they were subtle and took a very long time to make even a minor difference for most folks trying to get some shut-eye. It was just the slow turn of daily life. Okay, that covers the slow changes over time. End of the final part.